Amuna that Matzah give. Which Amuna are we talking about? And first, so it's not what it's not. It's not Amuna that Hashem exists. That's something which, in a certain sense, we can hardly use the word Amuna because this is something which we can see. And like he brings the pasuk, Miksari Erz Elaka, and we just like we observe the neshama and the guf, that although I don't know what the neshama looks like, I can't describe it, but I wouldn't say I need a muna to believe that there's a neshama inside this person. You just see it, that there's an identity here. And this is what gives the person life, because the guf itself is daimim, it's flesh, it's bones, it's something physical, no different than other physical objects and articles that you see. So the fact that this has life to it is clearly there's something more in it, which is the neshama. When you look at the world and you see the world is functioning and the world is everything that's going on in the world, it's clear that there's someone, which is Hashem, that's behind it and giving life to the world. This is a small guf, and the universe and the world is a big guf. Good morning. It came just on time as we're getting ready to move on to the next part of the Maimer. So then, what is Amunah? So let's start again. We'll back up a little bit. And we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll do 3 lines from the top. It says this Amunah is not something which is unique to Yidden to say this is what Hashem gave us at Har Sinai. But what is the right Amunah? So we'll start with 3 lines from the top. The first word on the line. Amunah shenesyachda liyisrael. What is the Amunah that is exclusively related to Yidden? And this is what Hashem expects the Yidden to believe, is like it says, Anechi Hashem Elokecha shetzisir from Eretz Mitzrayim. I am God, your God, that took you out of Mitzrayim. Klaimer. And therefore, when you see what happened in Mitzrayim, and you see the miracles, and you see that Hashem is totally not limited by nature, Taimen b'shleimus mitziyusei. That'll help you believe in how Eibishter's existence is perfect, is complete. Eibishter is not lacking and not limited. In other words, we're not talking about believing that Hashem exists. We're talking about that Hashem is unlimited, has no limitations. Look what he did in Mitzrayim. Mishkos of a Ramban Zal. So you wouldn't know this because probably you never put on tefillin by your bar mitzvahs, but it's interesting that there are certain mitzvahs, not many, that not only is it important to have kavanah, but if you don't have the kavanah to a certain extent, it's as if you didn't do the mitzvah. In other words, the kavanah is part of the performance of the mitzvah. One of them you might remember is sukkah. That when you eat in the sukkah, not only do we make the bracha of eating in the sukkah, but you have to have in mind we're eating in the sukkah because Yidden were in sukkahs when they went out of Mitzrayim. And if you don't have that in mind, it's as if you didn't do part of the act, which is the performance of the mitzvah. And the same is with tefillin. And what are you supposed to be thinking by tefillin? So Alter Rebbe writes that you're supposed to be thinking that tefillin, it reminds us that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. And that reminds us about the incredible miracles that Hashem did, which makes us aware that Hashem is unlimited and he can do whatever he wants, wherever he wants, whenever he wants, in the heavens above and the earth below, he's not limited. And that's Anech Hashem Elokecha. Not just that Hashem exists, but that his existence is unlimited and not lacking in any way. There's nothing in Hashem that Chas v'Shalom is lacking or weakness or any sort. Nothing is limited from him. And this is also K'meshkos of a Ramban Zal. Shehi mitzvah b'amunah. That's the mitzvah of amunah. Let's skip the bracket. That's a reference. So the mitzvah is he lahamin shemitziusa yizbarach, to believe that Hashem's existence who ram v'nizgav l'mayla mabchinazu shanarayim shemachayes olam. Hashem's existence and who he is way, way higher than what we see from the world that he created. And we explained last week, yes, you look at the world, you see that Hashem is there. But what do you know about Hashem? When you look at the world and you see what he created, you know that he has the ability to create this in this world. But you can't know things about Hashem that are beyond creation. That Hashem's koyach, which he with which he creates the world, is in the world. So koyach hapel means the koyach that creates, and nifel is in the creation. Hashem's koyach of creating is in the creation, and that's what we know. But we don't know anything beyond that. And this aspect that Hashem invests in creation, and this energy with which Hashem creates the world, and that's how from the creation we can know Hashem. But it's rak mebchinas zu rak mebchinas dvar havaya ruach pivis baruch. It's not really Hashem's essence. It's Hashem's words and the breath of Hashem's mouth, which means it's just like a person's words and breath of his mouth is insignificant to the neshama itself. That's how this power, which is responsible for the whole universe and everything in creation, but compared to Hashem, it's nothing. And this is called Memala Kol Almin. And why do we use the word, the speech or breath of Hashem's mouth? It's a mashal. Words are insignificant compared to thought. Thought has much more nefesh, much more soul energy to it than words. Words are relatively, yes, when we speak, there's also the neshama is in there, because when you speak, there's emotion, there's logic, there's a certain, it's not a tape recorder, but when a person speaks, there's a certain energy that's expressed through the speech. But it's nowhere compared to thought, which is actually part of my neshama. And the thought is nothing, the gabi seichel. You can't compare thought, which is one of the garments of the soul, to seichel, which is in a sense the soul itself. And you can't compare it to seichel, which even though is the highest faculty, but you can't compare that the gabi atzmius hanefesh, to the essence of the neshama, which is the source of all the 10 faculties and all the details. That's the essence. The same way, the sphere of Malchus, which is the 10th and the lowest of all the spheres, this is what Hashem invests in the world to sustain them, to give it life. Like one of the reasons that explain why Hashem created the world, because Hashem has an attribute called Malchus, and Malchus can be revealed unless there's a nation that accepts the kingdom. There's no king without a nation. So therefore, in a sense, Malchus is the source of creation. And Malchus is the lowest and the 10th sphere of all the spheres. And this is the deeper meaning to the words. We say it in Baruch Sha'amar in the morning. Baruch Sha'amar, blessed be Hashem that he spoke. The world became in existence through Hashem just speaking. Because it's the words of Hashem, Hashem who is the source of life, the king of the world. When he speaks, things become created. What it's written in the Shema, Hashem Echad, that's the aspect of Hashem that's not invested in creation. It's not like the neshama in the guf, hanira the ayin that we could see. So the mashal I gave before, that when you look at the guf, you see there's a soul, and you look at the world, you see there's some source that's pumping life into the world. That's mamala kolam. But there's a higher level than that, and that's called Sovev Kolamin. And that's not invested in the world. So when you look at the world, you can't see that aspect, which is Sovev Kolamin, which is the aspect of Hashem that's beyond creation. And that's the mitzvah that Hashem is telling us, but you should believe, Gamkein, even though you don't see it, the whole entire universe and everything in it, B'Teilim, Be'emes, B'Metzias, Legamri, Esli, Yisbarach. It's totally bottled to Hashem. Ve'einoi k'mei haguf. It's not like the guf. What does it mean? The guf is also bottled to the neshama. The guf is also something which is not just the neshama is in the guf, but the guf is bottled in the neshama. What I mean by what?
Can I just check in?
You can check in, yes.
Following along, okay. So it's explaining like the Ruach Piv that created the world is nothing compared to Hashem himself. So when people are having a Luna and what they see of how the world works and like seeing, oh, it must be Hashem creating it, that's like only looking at the external and not
Right.
looking at the deeper.
Right.
It's obvious to the eye.
Right.
That's like the external.
Right. The deeper doesn't manifest through creation. It's not invested in creation.
Okay.
What's the deeper? The deeper is Seva Kolam.
Okay.
Right. And the deeper is something else. Something, before we use the analogy, we draw a parallel between Hashem giving life to the world and then Hashem giving life to the body, but that's the lower level. This level, Seva Kolam, is not a good analogy. Why? Because the neshama doesn't create the body. The body is an entity in its own right. And that's why, Rahman al-Islam, when the soul leaves the body is still in existence. So what does the soul do? The soul activates the body. It gives it life, but it doesn't create it yesh miyayin. So therefore, I wouldn't say that the body is totally bottled to the neshama. It's bottled to the neshama. And again, let's go back to what we spoke about last time, about when you talk to a person, you're not talking to the guf, and you're not talking to the neshama, and you're also not talking to something which is dual, like a double identity, a guf and a neshama together. That doesn't make any sense. So who are we talking to? We're talking to the person, which means the physical body, which really is a separate entity from the neshama, it became so much one with the neshama that its identity became the neshama. The body is the identity of the person. We don't look at the body as something separate. Many years ago, I was once listening to this lecture that a Orthodox scientist was giving, and the subject was, this is a long time ago, because this is when I was in Australia, so it has to be somewhere close between 55 and 60 years ago. And the discussion was that in the future, which we're there right now, there's going to be such a thing as robots. What happens if you have 9 people in a shul and the 10th one is a robot? But the robot could daven, you could put him on tefillin, he could have tzitzis, he's part of the whole minyan. Could you and he's intelligent, could you use the robot for the minyan?
No.
That was the discussion. It's an interesting topic, but I remember the conclusion was that you can't. And what was the reason? Not the reason you think. The reason is because he's not Jewish. And you can't immerse him in a mikveh because it'll ruin the whole mechanism. My question to you is, so you have like this, you have electric energy that's activating the robot. Compare that to the neshama activating the guf. Is it the same or not? I don't mean if the neshama is the same as electricity. I'm talking about just one aspect. The merging of the electrical energy that activates the robot and looks as if he's independent, doing whatever he wants. And the neshama activates the guf. That connection, is it the same or is it different?
Like in some sense it's the same because they're both enlivening, but I feel like with the robot, like not like his own.
I know you all know the answer, but just someone has to just put it into words.
Not like his own identity. It's just like
Still 2 separate things. Like,
Right. When the electricity activates a robot, it's no different than me moving this marker. The marker is the same thing that it was before, and there's some outside force that's moving it, whether it's my hand or a wind. By the robot, it's so much more complex, so you don't see it, it's not so obvious. But the piece of metal was metal, is metal, it's going to be metal, nothing changes. and there's some sort of energy called electricity that's moving the hands and the feet and making it words come out, whatever it's doing, but it's something else is activating this piece of metal. With the neshama and a guf, the body becomes the neshama. The neshama becomes the life of the body, the identity of the body. In a sense, the body becomes the physical part of the neshama, and the neshama becomes the life of the physical flesh and blood. There's nothing in the world, we can probably say, that merges in this way than the neshama and guf. And by the way, this is nothing to do with Yidden or non-Jews or even humans or animals. Wherever there's a merge of neshama and guf, that's the kind of merge that the identity of the neshama becomes the identity of guf. It's not two separate things. Not one thing is pushing another thing. So that means the guf really becomes bottled to the neshama, becomes one. In a certain sense, the body is no longer seen as something separate. Nevertheless, in essence, it is separate because the neshama didn't create the body. And that's why the body can continue to exist without the neshama inside. However, when we talk about the creation, so Malak Kalam is the same thing. Malak Kalam is not the energy of Hashem that really creates the world, it's the energy of Hashem that activates the world, makes things move, gives everything its color, its nature, it's the way it functions. That's what Mamala Kalam does. It makes flowers be the way flowers are, and animals the way animals are, and a giraffe is like this, and an elephant is like that, and a human is like this, and water is like that. And all these differences, the gazillion differences that there are in everything in creation, that's Mamala Kalam giving everything in the world its nature and its characteristic or personality or whatever it may be. So what's Sayu Kalam? That's the aspect of Hashem that creates it yesh me'ayin. Compared to that, the guf is like a non-mitzias completely. When you talk about the neshama and the neshama is the main thing, and the guf is bottled to the neshama. It loses its identity and becomes part of the neshama. But when you're talking about Seva Kalam, you can't even use the word that it's secondary to the neshama. It's Lagabi that, it's non-existent. It doesn't have any basis to exist. It only exists because of Seva Kalam. So really what we learned in the Maimer in the beginning of the year, the Maimer of Micha Moicha, that it's not a true Metzius. Its existence does not belong to itself. So the bittul is a much greater bittul. And if this is too philosophical for so early in the morning, we'll do it again and chew it over a little bit slower.
What is it about bittul?
In other words, there's two ways of describing bittul. When the neshama gives life to the guf is bottled to the neshama. Let's use the word bottle as if it's secondary. It loses its importance compared to neshama. I mean, to use an example, let's say in halacha. So of course, it's not a perfect example, but let's say the word bittul in halacha. You have a piece of cake, and in the cake there's also something which is like part of a fruit. You make mezainis or you make ha'etz. What? Mezainis. So that means I'm eating fruit without a bracha, basically. But I didn't make ha'etz. I'm eating the fruit part without a bracha. What?
It's bottled to the cake. Like it's part of the cake. It's like.
So when I say mezainis, it includes it includes that, right?
Yeah.
Why? Because the cake is the primary thing, and the fruit part is the secondary. That's bittul, but it still is what it is. In fact, when I taste it, I do taste the fruit part as well. It's there. It just loses its importance. It loses its significance in the presence of something greater. Or there's another example. The Gemara says that why do we search for chametz at night? Why not search for chametz by day? The sun is shining, and you have even more light to search for chametz. Why dafka at night? So the answer is the purpose of searching for chametz is not to look on the floor. That you could see, in a sense, without a candle. The purpose of searching for chametz is mainly to look in the cracks and the crevices all the way like you don't notice it right away. For that, you need to take a candle, bring it close to that spot, and look for it. So Gemara says, by day, during daylight, candlelight it becomes insignificant. In other words, if you hold up a candle during the day, like right now, the sun is shining, you go outside with a candle, you might not even see the flame. Somebody might burn themselves because they didn't notice that the candle was on fire. Why? The flame didn't become smaller. The flame didn't become less fire. Its significance, it gets lost in the presence of a bigger light. So the guf gets lost, its identity gets lost. It becomes part of the neshama. That's its identity. It loses its own personal identity. But we can't say it's totally nothing because it does exist in its own right. And like we said, when the neshama leaves, the guf still goes on. But when you talk about Seviv Kolamim, which means that's the life of Hashem that sustains it every second. And if that chayas would leave for a second, then it wouldn't exist. So the gabi that, it's totally bottle, it's a non-mitzvah completely. Yeah.
Excuse me. Can we are we saying that the growth is bustles of the neshama like all the time, even when like not doing Torah mitzvahs, or like when I get to Torah in the way? Because like I thought that's how our neshama is trying to express itself. So then like if we're not doing these things, like
You're talking about the Nefesh Elokis. I'm talking about just the neshama that gives life to the guf, which is the Nefesh Bahamis, which is no difference if it's from Jew, non-Jew, a human being. His life is, the mere fact that my hands and feet just follow my will, whatever I want to do, that's called the guf, batul the neshama. Like the Alter Rebbe says, as soon as I want to do something, like I don't have to say, okay, hand, move.
Yeah.
It just moves naturally because the neshama is so in sync, the guf is so in sync with the neshama. As soon as I want, the hand or feet, it's like this involuntarily things that happen. I don't even have to give any sort of, make a special effort. It just happens automatically because it's one. That's the true bittul. And that sort of makes no difference. What you're talking about is more the godly part of the neshama. What is it saying tiny about the nefesh bahamis? Nefesh bahamis is in the blood, and that's the nefesh that gives us life, physical life. I was wondering if I put it down in the terms. Let me just take a look, so maybe you can note it now. It'll be easier to follow. It's very likely they didn't know. But you hopefully might remember this from Yicha Moicha, from that mimer, which talks about this concept. We use the word bittul hayesh and bittul b'mitzias. You remember that? Bittul hayesh means it's a yesh, it has some substance, but it's bottle for something higher. Bittul b'mitzias means it has no true substance at all, because the only reason for its existence is the Seviv Kolamim that's giving it life every second. Let's read the words again inside. The guf. It's not like the guf. Shu tafel in neshama. That the guf is tafel. Tafel means secondary to the neshama. But mikol mokem hu yesh b'fnei atzmai. It does have its own identity. It's a yesh. The guf is a guf, and it's flesh and blood, and it's bones and muscles and whatever the body has, and it's different than the neshama. The reason for that is the guf is not created by the neshama. So the guf comes from a different channel. It comes physically from the father and the mother that create the guf. And but the heaven and the earth, that they are created from nothing, absolute nothingness, and which means that the whole world would be nothing every second if not for that chayas. Mamish, they bottle completely to the words of Hashem, to the Seviv Kolamim. And of course, the same with the guf. By the way, so how's the guf a lot? How does the guf exist if the neshama doesn't create it? The answer is just like a rock has Seviv Kolamim in it, and just like a tree has Seviv Kolam in it, it creates it. Just like the mountains have Seviklam in it, the guf also has that power. If that energy of Hashem would be removed 1 second, in that second, the guf would become non-existent. So it means that everything in the world, and especially if we talk about the body, has two sort of sources of life. One is the neshama gives life to the body, but that is what activates the body and gives the body its identity. And the other is Seviklam, which creates the body, yesh me'ayin, every second. And if not for that, it wouldn't exist. So the bittul to that is total bittul. It doesn't have its true identity. It's only here because of something else.
Justin,
Yeah.
in the text, what was it after when we call who? What is it? Yesh, pei ayin.
Bifnei atzmei, in its own right. So when he says that it's batel mamish, he adds two more words: ka'er hashemesh, like the light of the sun, kishuhu beguf kader hashemesh, like it is in the actual sun itself. I was thinking of actually pausing and learning Shariach and Ramuna, but then I figured maybe let's first do it here. We'll see if we need to do that. You were here there, yeah, okay. But I'll just bring in what it says there. These two words is a whole subject in Chassidus, something that Alter Rebbe talks about in a few places, and every Rebbe of Chabad spoke about it, elaborate on it. It's a mashal the Alter Rebbe gives to understand the bittul of the world, and he gives this mashal. The sun gives off light, right? How powerful is the light? We know the sun shines for millions of miles. Anybody here know how far the sun is from us? Something is 93 million miles. I'm not sure if it's the sun or the moon. But anyway, if you have any scientific scholars here in the room, it's definitely millions and millions of miles away. And it shines at a distance of who knows how many thousands of miles. So the sun is so powerful that it shines its light all over the world, which is millions and millions of miles. So Alter Rebbe says, if the light of the sun is so powerful, the sun could produce light, and for the whole world, certainly there's light in the sun itself, in the source, because that's where it's coming from. However, in the sun itself, you're not going to find any light. Why not? Because in the sun, all you'll find is the source. There's no place you can point into the source and say, here's the source, and this is the light. The light in the sun is included in the source. The only place where you can recognize light is outside of the source. For the next 100,000 and millions of miles, anywhere outside of the source, that's where you see the light as something separate. But in the source, it's part of the source. I don't mean part that if you have real good microscope, you look inside, you'll see the light. Part of the source means it doesn't have its own identity. That's the source that has the power, the potential to give off light. Does this make sense? Got it? Yeah? So then the Alter Rebbe says, if you think of the world and the creation, what would be the analogy? Well, how do we draw the parallel? The parallel is that the words of Hashem that create the world, yesh me'ayin, that's the sun. The actual creation would be like the light coming from the sun. Let's make it visual. Wow, somebody prepared the board that we have all the space we need. So this is, let's say, an object. We'll say this is a tree. And it's Hashem's energy that gives light to the tree. The words of Hashem. Let's say the word would be eitz, which means a tree. Okay. So this would be similar to the sun. And this is the earth. And the sun gives light to the earth, right? But the difference is that in the case of the sun, we just finished saying inside the sun, there's no light. In the source, there is no light. So the reason why we see the light, because it's outside of the sun, right? But the tree and its source, this tree can be outside of the source. This source is in here. The tree is in its source the whole time. Hashem is not in one place, and the tree is in another place. Hashem is in the walls, in the floor, in everything that we see. Hashem's presence is there. That means that the Dvar Havaya, which is the source, is in the object, but the object is in it. So then it's like the light in the sun that has no existence whatsoever. So why do we see the world as an existence? That's because of Tzimtzum. But in essence, the world is like non-existent because it's in its source. And that's the mashal that Alter Rebbe means when he says it's like the light of the sun in the source. Again, in Shayach Ramuna, this is explained. In other Maimarim, they go into that length, a lot of details about this mashal, but this is the general idea. Any questions? You sure? So it's very interesting. After the Alter Rebbe explains this, then he asks the question. So and he finishes the chapter with this question, and he says, "So if that's the case, how can we even see the world as a separate entity? It's like just like you don't see the light in the sun, we shouldn't see anything in existence because it's in its source." And he stops there and explains it in the next chapter. So Chassidim asked the question, how come the Alter Rebbe stops off with a question like that? Well, what's the problem? It's known that Chassidim do not study philosophy, even Torah philosophy books. The Rambam wrote a book on philosophy. I'm not talking about philosophy about who knows what. Philosophy about creation, about Hashem. It's called Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed. Chavis Halvavis wrote philosophy books. There are a lot of great tzaddikim that wrote books that are a philosophy about proving that Hashem exists, that the Torah is true, answering questions that people raise. But in Chassidus, we don't go there at all. You'll never find Chassidus like, on Maimon, let's bring proof that this is true or that's true. Chassidus just talks about the truth, and that's it. What's one of the reasons for that is, and by the way, the Tzemach Tzedek also has a book, Sefer, it's called Sefer Achkira, a book of philosophy. We don't even learn that either. And why does he have such a book? Because the Tzemach Tzedek had to go to Petersburg and have debates with the people from the Enlightenment movement. And these were questions that they raised, and they had to answer it in the presence of the government officials. So later this was documented and put into a book, but Hasidim generally don't even study that either. So one of the reasons are given is because what happens if you read a book like that, it raises a question that challenges something in Amunah. Okay, now it's late at night, you got to go to sleep. So you close the book. And while you're sleeping, the question really sinks in, goes into your head. And then tomorrow, you have a good question, and somehow the answer doesn't register so good. So you're left with a question. So you're really going to risky, dangerous waters by doing that. That's one answer. Another answer is even if tomorrow morning you'll have an answer, but at night, you're sleeping like a heretic. You have questions about about the truth about Hashem. So therefore, we don't do that. So Chassidim asked, so why did Alter Rebbe finish off with a question? You're finishing a chapter, ending off with a question. Now you're going to go to sleep, and tomorrow morning, so it's going to make the problem. So the answer is no, it's a different kind of question. Those questions were, does Hashem exist? Is the Torah true? Is Moshe true? This is the question, is how the world exists. That's the kind of question that doesn't matter if you go to sleep with such a question. How does the world exist? How could we see a world? I will tell you the story. There was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. It's called Aram Strasheller. He once had a Fabrengen, and he was talking about this subject about bittul and the world is nothing, and the sun is like the sun of the light of the sun and the sun. It was the biggest chassid of the Alter Rebbe. He was a chavrusa of the Mittul Rebbe, and later he became a Rebbe himself. But he was a very great chassid, and he got all excited. After that, he started to dance, and all the chassidim danced with him. And as he was dancing, there was an oven in the wall that was sticking out a little bit. So when he was dancing, he went crashing into the oven. And as he crashed in the oven, he goes, looks like an oven does exist. He was thinking about bittul, boom, oh, an oven does exist. So This is the difference when we talk about Mamal Kolam and Seyu Kolam. So how does the world exist? The answer is, the Alter Rebbe explains, that's what Tzimtzum is all about. Tzimtzum means Hashem's power of Tzimtzum is infinite, is unlimited. So you can create a world that's totally bottled to Hashem. It's not a fake world. It's not a figment of our imagination. Hashem creates a real existence, and we shouldn't be able to see it because it's in its source, but because of Tzimtzum, we perceive ourselves and we see ourselves as separate from Hashem, even though we're not. And that's the deeper meaning of the word ein oid. What is ein oid? If you look in the booklet, references, you have the references, right? Together with the workbook, I think, or not? Oh, it's in this book, right? So look at page 40, you have it in one place. This pasuk we have in Aleinu. V'yadaita hayoim, v'shabeisa levecha, Ki Hashem hu Elokim, Hashem is God, B'Shemayim Yimal, the heavens above, Earth mitachas. Then we add Ein Oid. After saying that He is the only one in the heavens above and the earth below, we add another word, Ein Oid. Similarly, on page 15 and 16, Ata Harei Saladas, you showed us that we should know, Ki Hashem hu Elokim, Ein Oid Mubadei. So what does the word Ein Oid mean? Ein Oid means there is nothing else, there's not another thing. Meaning to say, the word oid in Hebrew means, the simple meaning of the word oid means this and another thing. So when we say ein oid means not only that the world is like another thing to Hashem, but it's as if it's non-existent completely. It's totally bottled. So oid is a word that implies there's two things, but one is like tagging along. One is secondary to the other, oid. Like when you say, I did this and I also did that. The second thing is usually the least important, the less important, it's secondary, and that's why I use the term. And I also did this, also. That's what also means. So oid means another thing. And reference to Hashem, we can't even say that the world is like another thing. With the guf and the neshama, that's the way it is. The main thing is the neshama. Everything comes from the neshama. The neshama gives it life. But the guf is also something, but it's just oid. It's secondary to the neshama. But in the case of the world, you can't even say that it's secondary. Yeah.
What does the word mubado add to that? Like, what's the difference?
Ein Oid Mubadi, nothing else besides him. I mean, you touched on a good question because there are many Marmarim that go into the difference. What if it says Ein Oid or it says Ein Oid Mubadi? Which one do you think is higher? Bittul? You're right. That's true. Ein Oid is a higher level of Bittul than Ein Mubadi. But I think if we go into that, then it would be a little bit too much. So we'll just leave it at this for now. And maybe it'll come up somewhere. But generally speaking, it means even when we say Einai, there's also levels, more levels of Bittul. Very deep. Okay, we'll stop here. To be continued, Mirza Hashem. Look her up, everybody.
I know. Yeah, and she went. I don't know. Yeah, but meet her in Bailey. She must have been so baby. Yeah, so she's kind of rude also. I mean, she went before. And yeah, she's that. Vern's gone, dude. Yeah, so Vern always seen her down. The first time, I think she was just like, whatever, like, you only have two out. Like, but when Vern and I did 2, we did 3. This time she was like, no, we gave them all away. Like, are you sure? Like, I think I'll